Welcome to Zambia's hottest radio talk show. And now, join your host, Zakaria Chavula, on the hot seat, exclusive to Hot FM 87.7.
Thank you so much for joining me. It's a very good morning to you. It's Thursday, the 14th of June, 2018, and we are back. And today on the program, we'll be discussing government's approach to the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. The World Health Organization Framework Convention on Tobacco Control is the first treaty negotiated under the auspices of the World Health Organization. It is an evidence-based treaty that reaffirms the right of all people to the high standard of health and represents a paradigm shift in developing a regulatory strategy to address addictive substances in contrast to previous drug control treaties. Zambia has been producing tobacco, a legalized crop, for over 50 years, contributing to the livelihoods of local subsistence farmers in a number of provinces. Since 2008, when Zambia acceded to the WHO FCTC treaty, the government's views have varied from a health and trade perspective. In the studio this morning, I have with me Mrs. Sharon Sichilongo, a representative from the Business Regulatory Review Commission, and I also have Mr. Boniface Mumba, the Executive Director, Center for Environment Justice, on the program. And of course, much later, we'll be joined by Mr. Chris Zumani Zimba from the Krizima Democracy University. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. How are you?
Thank you. Good morning, Zach. And good to be here.
Good morning.
Alrighty. Now, maybe to put the motion into action, it would be nice for us, for the benefit of the listener, to kindly explain what precisely is the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control.
Okay, thanks very much, Zach. Can I take that one first?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, like you indicated, I'm Boniface Mumba, coming from an institution called the Center for Environment Justice. Yeah, it's a it's a big animal or a big elephant in this room. So when we're having a discussion about the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, sometimes you find talking to yourself because it's not well or much discussed openly, isn't it? So I think it's a first treaty, a global treaty. I mean, that a health treaty. It is an issue-based treaty that reaffirms the right of all people to the high standard of health. And, excuse me. And the FCTC was developed by countries in response to the globalization of the tobacco epidemic. It aims to tackle some of the causes of the epidemic, including complex factors. And this cuts across board, and they look at investment, advertisement, the environmental factors. And in the current state, it has been signed, or the treaty has been signed by 180 countries. And allow me just to set the tone good. Allow me just to highlight some of the table or the articles of the treaty that has a very key. You may find that
what is contained in the treaty.
Yes, thanks very much. So you look at that, is that first you have Article 1 to 2 that just basically looks at terminologies and the link that the FCTC has got to other treaties, the relationship. Then you also look at Articles 3 to 5, establish the objective, guiding principles and general obligation. Then you have Article 6 to 14, demand side reduction measures. Then Article 15 to 17, supply side reduction measures. Then Article 18, protection of the environment. Then you've got Article 19, looks at the liability. You have Articles 20 to 22, cooperation and communication. You have got Articles 23 to 26, institutional arrangement and financial resources. And you've got Article 27 that looks at settlement of disputes. You've got Article 28 and 29, development of the convention. Then you've got, not the least, but at the end, Articles 30 to 38, final provision covering statutory matters such as means of acceding to the convention entry into force. And Zambia, just to take note, was quite one of the first countries in Africa to do so.
Okay, so by and large, you're saying Zambia did sign?
Yes.
And ratify this treaty. So if that's the case, what impact does that have on the country's tobacco industry?
Well, perhaps maybe coming from the Business Regulatory Review Agency, I would like to take on that question. And just to maybe briefly state that the mandate of the Business Regulatory Review Agency is to review policies and laws that impact on business activity, and to ensure that all policies and legislation that is being put in place is not overly burdensome to business. If you look at the question that you've just put on the table, what we would require as an agency is a situation where there is consultation to ensure that we look at the various impacts, the possible impacts of the policies that have been put in place. If you look at the FCTC, it's looking at basically issues of protection of the environment and protection of health. And I think we as Zambia are promoting the tobacco sector as a part of the sectors that are supposed to contribute to economic growth and also contribute to employment creation. Because you understand that the tobacco sector is a very huge sector in Zambia, and in terms of employment, there are several people that are affected. So what we would expect is that when there is a shift in policy that will affect this particular sector, there should be consultations at all levels. And
so are you saying the consultation wasn't exhausted, or what precisely are you alluding to?
What I'm stating is that it is important to involve all stakeholders as we proceed to implement the FCTC conditions. We will need to get all the farmers involved in the consultative process. We'll need to get the businesses, those that are involved in the tobacco processing.
Have we moved ahead, or are we still consulting? Where are we at?
I think the consultation is still there.
Okay.
Because we haven't even reached the stage where we are going to domesticate the FCTC. So the opportunity is still there, and the consultative process is still ongoing. So what I'm emphasizing, coming from the Business Regulatory Review Agency, is that there is need to ensure that as the consultation goes on, we identify who are the key players. There's the private sector. There's also the public sector, which includes the regulators of this sector, who should come on board and be part of the process to ensure that whatever decisions...
So since you're coming from the business sector, so how are you going to make sure that everybody is consulted, everybody is brought on board before critical decisions are made?
First of all, the framework to ensure that the consultative process is exhaustive is there. There's the Business Regulatory Act, which stipulates that for any policy or any law to be put in place which has an impact on business activity, there has to be this consultative process. It is law that the consultations must be undertaken. And this actually requirement is found in Section 6 under the Business Regulatory Act. It requires that before any law or policy that will affect business activity is put in place, and before it can even be taken to cabinet for approval, there has to be, first of all, an impact assessment. That's the other thing that we have to look at. A regulatory impact assessment is important, and this is what must be done also concerning the FCTC. We need to undertake a regulatory impact assessment in order to understand what are the possible impacts of this framework on the business, the tobacco sector specifically. So there will be need for us to undertake a regulatory impact assessment so that we understand and what the impacts might be on the sector. And then this regulatory impact assessment also requires that the consultative process is also embedded in the analysis, because you would need to consult the various stakeholders in order to ensure that you understand what the challenges might come with the implementation of the FCTC, and also understand what are the options that we have in terms of implementation. So this consultative process will be able to bring in all the views from all stakeholders, and ultimately it should result in a consensus in terms of how we move forward.
Boniface, do you agree with what she's saying?
I think the conversation that has brought on table is very important, based on the question that you've raised. The issue and what we are looking at, the theme of the discussion, the multi-sectorial approach. And if you looked at the way even the FCTC is structured, it demands, even where indicated that, yes, it's a first health global treaty, globally. And that looks at issues of tobacco. But I think what's important is also to see how does it sit in a country, in a particular and specific country. What are its impact, isn't it? And by nature, the way it comes out, its articles are very clear that it's multi-sectorial and it has got several faces. It doesn't have one lens. The issue is that how able or what has Zambia done so far to this point in enabling that the environment, one, the level of awareness. You are a media practitioner, Zach. How many interactions or contact have you had the conversation about FCTC itself? It tells you the limitation that's there. So even the government itself has got a process, what they call FPIC. That's a free, prior, informed consent. So Zambians need to when you're signing a treaty or getting in a treaty, Zambians need to have a collective consensus. We may not agree, but we need to have a collective consensus that, yes, this is what we want to push forth as a country. And you need further, if you are going to talk about domestication, you can further look at the articles. What are the articles that are relevant to this country? Because the domestication, when you look at, some of the articles that are, especially around Article 22 to 23.
So we need to have something tailor-made for Zambia alone. What are you saying?
Of course, Zambia can look at the articles and prescribe to what is applicable and what is relevant. Because there is a lot of, I think we cannot have a one lane or one-way thought. We can have a holistic. If you're talking about environment, what are you talking about vis-a-vis tobacco? From Zambia, are you talking tobacco as a crop, as a crop, or as the actual cigarette? You understand? So you need to bring that narrative to the table. But the issue is that when Zambia has signed the treaty, you're obliged to get to the implementation level, isn't it? So that's the dilemma.
So we've already signed, isn't it?
We have. So that's a dilemma, and we need to get to the point of domestication. So in this dilemma, like she had indicated, we have space. Can now Zambians be engaged to the latter, so that the conversation is brought to my grandmother in the village, isn't it? Who talks about tobacco, especially when you talk about even issues of alternative crop. What are we talking about? Are we talking about issues of, the financial impact? The issues of health. How do you address them? Because they're also pertinent and they're very key. So we cannot have just...
So the issues of environment as well as health are very, very important, isn't it?
Yes, and
so
as
you
well
have
as
to
the
take those
economy.
into consideration.
Yes, as well as the economical bit. So, this is about business. This is about livelihood. This is about, cultural practices. And a lot of these. So for me...
But how then do you strike a balance when it comes to that? Maybe... Chris,
yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. The conversation, I think, is an important one. But the point is that, like any other public policy, the FCTC is a public policy document, though it has been signed at international level.
Yes.
So the question is, what are the actual policy issues in Zambia, with specific reference to tobacco? The Ministry of Health, I think, which is the parent ministry for the treaty, has the duty and the responsibility to open the door and to engage other stakeholders, as my colleagues have said, from both the state players as well as the non-state players. For example, within the government, there are a lot of interested stakeholders or line ministries that have got a bigger stake on tobacco. The Minister of Agriculture, for example, is a big stakeholder on tobacco. They need to play a key role in this process. The Ministry of Finance, tobacco is a business. We are making a revenue out of tobacco. The Ministry of Finance, they need to play a key role in this process. Talk about the Ministry of Commerce and Trade. If you look at the Central Statistics, for example, monthly bulletin, you discover that tobacco is one of the is one of the high postings in terms of the non-traditional earnings or exporters for Zambia. So the Ministry of Finance become very key in this matter. Talk about the Ministry of National Development, the Ministry of National Planning and Development, because it's a developmental issue. The tobacco itself, we can use it to modernize Zambia, because this is a crop, a cash crop, which is, like, for example, 7 times more profitable per hectare than maize. We are talking about a cash crop which is, for example, 14 times more profitable per hectare than cotton. So We can use tobacco, and a lot of countries in the SADC region are using tobacco as a developmental a catalyst. Malawi, for example, the 60% of their GDP is anchored on tobacco. Talk about Zimbabwe, 20% of their GDP is anchored on tobacco. So even on the Zambian side, tobacco is a big developmental factor or catalyst. So the Minister of National Planning and Development, they become very key. What about the Minister of Labor? She has indicated. How many Zambians are employed on the production?
So a lot of
yes, so it's a multi-sectoral approach. So
involved in
that's the point. So it's something that we need to emphasize, that you can't talk about either signing or domesticating a policy of this nature without a multi-sectoral approach. From the non-state players, there are a list of institutions we can name here that need to be considered. The ordinary farmers themselves, tobacco farmers, what is their stake? What is their say and stake on the FCTC?
Anyway, so what conversation is going on when it comes? I mean, this seems it's not an easy thing. Isn't
It is not an easy thing. I think at some point the ministry which the Ministry of Health, because the FCTC is a public health treaty, so to speak. So the Ministry of Health played a key role. They signed to it through the ministry, the minister in 2008. But it's like there is a policy gap in terms of consultations and stakeholder engagement. And I think, as my colleagues are saying, that's the line we need to press now, so that we need to suspend talking about domestication. What are you going to domesticate if the stakeholders have not given you consent? So it's a very notorious policy issue. Just like, for example, you remember some few months ago we had the National Land Policy which was drafted. The key stakeholders ran away or rejected it. Who are the chiefs? So it is in the same manner that we are not talking about the FCTC. Let's not treat it as...
So we need to reach a consensus.
The consensus is very important, because it is going to affect each and every Zambian who has a stake on tobacco. And as I said, and my colleagues have indicated, the list is endless in terms of the players from the state actors and the non-state actors that need to come on board. Because tobacco, as I to mention, it is a well-coordinated and regulated sector, by the way, in terms of regulation. So the FCTC is not coming to feel anarchy or chaos in terms of how tobacco is being produced or sold in Zambia. The Tobacco Act is the #1 domestic law which is coordinating, regulating, and promoting tobacco in Zambia. So we have our own laws currently that we are using to coordinate tobacco, because through the Tobacco Act and the Tobacco Board of Zambia, you'll be able to know how many...
Do you believe the laws are sufficient?
To a great extent, we just need to improve in one way or the other. But so, in terms of coordination and regulation, we are not in a vacuum or in an anarchy. We already have the laws, and the Tobacco Board of Zambia are doing a very good job.
If I may just add, actually, we do have a great opportunity, because I am aware that the Tobacco Board of Zambia is in the process of spearheading the process of amending the Act. So perhaps this is an opportunity that could be used as the consultation progresses. We try and see what does the...
But are you taking advantage of that?
That's what I'm saying, that this is something that the country could take advantage of, to try and see how would the FCTC fit into the current laws that regulate the sector. And this opportunity of the Act being amended is something that could be taken advantage of.
Yeah, and just to add on, Zach, I think any treaty that comes does not come and create its own new institutions. Any treaty is implemented within the already existing structures, that's a government, whatever. So I think what we need now is, like Chris had said, there's need and the law. But for me, I think that the law needs to be worked on. That's just another addition, that it is too old, the legal framework is too old, and like she had indicated, there's that opportunity, that as we are looking into the Act, we can now mirror the FCTC, isn't it? What are the existing gaps? What are the key issues that are pertinent for Zambia? Because you are also talking about what colleagues have elaborated clearly, the multifaceted that it brings on board, and the realities of an African country, and how then do you become relevant to this process. And I think we need also to take time to mirror other treaties. What are some of the successes? What are some of the challenges? How far have we gone into the implementation? I know that there are a few. We have the Paris Agreement. I think the Kyoto Protocol can also be a good learning. Why the Kyoto Protocol, which was a global environmental treaty, protocol, failed to achieve because certain level of coherence by the LDCs, which we call the least developing countries, isn't it? So are we able to create that level of balance as we engage? But the bigger picture, after all is said and done, Zach, what is the Zambian story? That's what we need to answer, isn't it? So if you're going to domesticate a football treaty, an environmental treaty, a water treaty, a tobacco or a health treaty, you have to bring the conversation home. And ultimately, it's Zach and myself are privileged to be informed. Have we created an awareness mechanism to even the consensus is able to be documented that in Mwansabombwe, in Katete, in Chama, the Zambians have said we are ready to participate. For me, it's not whether we take on the 100% entire FCTC content or not, but have Zambians say this is what they want. If this is what they want, that's good, isn't it? If there are concerns, how do we raise and address those concerns? What are the processes of engagement that are able to say that even you, Zach, tomorrow, when you're reading about FCTC, you're able to say that me and my household, we have been able to be addressed in this treaty, isn't it? That's what I think that's very key as well.
Now, since we're on it, now the effects of tobacco on the health of citizens does remain a concern for most stakeholders. Definitely. So, but how does the FCTC address such challenges?
I think the FCTC has addressed them quite elaborate. If you look at the articles that we are talking about, even issues of sales in terms of, but I think we need to, the FCTC is very clear. It's very clear when it talks about that, because somehow that's what it labors to achieve, isn't it? That we are able to manage this product, because by the end of the day, tobacco is a legal product. So when you're having a conversation about it, it is true whether you say no or not. It's not an illegal product, isn't it? It's a legal product. So how then do we make sure that even the issues that have been raised, for example, even the Act is very clear. You need smoking zones, isn't it? So are we linking that to the implementation framework at the local government level? So when you have one lens, like colleagues have said, isn't it? You are not able to see the council, the Lusaka City Council, and the police to ensure that we are able to achieve this, isn't it? Unless we bring the every stakeholder on board, it will be very difficult to achieve. But when you're talking about health, I think that's the primary agenda to achieve, and it is very elaborate about that. And most of the article try to look at that. It even goes as far as how much can we look at issues of taxation? How can we use tax to minimize this? How can we use the value chain process? How can we bring in the issues of conversation? When curing tobacco, and the tobacco farming has got a lot of issues to do with the environment. That's the whole conversation. But how then do we bring it to that level? And it's for me, from my take, it's at the act level, at the low level in Zambia. It's very clear. It's there. What are the missing links? What is good from the FCTC? Because I don't think it's a devil.
Are there any missing links? As far as you're concerned,
the missing links is that the missing number one is for me is that everyone here agrees that there's no consensus and elaborate engagement. For me that's the number one missing link, because it's an international treaty that you are going to bring home and you use to galvanize you. So you have to understand in terms of what are the guiding principles, what is it trying to achieve. You understand? So when you go to the content before understanding the principle itself, it becomes very challenging. So let me allow Chris to top up.
Yeah. Just to add to what Boniface said in terms of the other missing link is that if you look at the globalization of the tobacco pandemic with a specific reference to data and how many people are affected by tobacco smoking, it's another missing link, because much of the data in terms of how many people, for example, have died out of tobacco smoking is Western. So we're talking about figures, statistics, which are very high, for example, in Greece, in the US, in Canada, in Britain itself.
So are you saying the situation when it comes to Zambia is unique? But it's not the same
story in Zambia or Malawi or Zimbabwe, because the point is African countries are only tobacco producers.
And Zambia consumers that much.
Are not tobacco consumers.
Uh-huh.
So in terms of the health effects that you're asking, because it's a health, smoking is a health challenge or pandemic. It's not a pandemic in Zambia. We do not even have statistics, for example, in the Zambian context to quantify how many people from a health and a medical point of view have been affected by tobacco smoking. In the US or Britain, they do have that statistic. So for them, domesticating the FCTC becomes more compatible as well as urgent, because they are dealing with a health emergency issue. On our side, tobacco is business. Tobacco is business in Zambia, in Malawi, in Zimbabwe, in Tanzania, because much of it is at production level. Less than 1% of Zambians smoke tobacco. That's the beauty about it. But tobacco is feeding a lot of Zambians. More than 400,000 Zambians are employed on the tobacco chain, the production chain. So it has got more benefits on our side from the business point of view, from the trade point of view, from the commerce point of view, even from a developmental catalyst point of view. If you look at the 7th National Development Plan, for example, which are our key governance documents in terms of public policy, tobacco is one of the key cash crop the government of Zambia have prioritized to promote and scale up, because it has been identified to be very much useful in terms of jump-starting and steering our agricultural sector. So it's a very different story in terms of the FCTC in Zambia as compared to the UK, Germany, or France, or Greece, or China, because they are on the consuming side. In Africa, just like in Malawi, in Tanzania, and other countries, and Zambia itself, we are also on the producing side. So the missing gap is that we do not have statistics to quantify the health effects, negative effects of tobacco in Zambia itself.
But why haven't we gone ahead to do that?
And I think that's where now the multi-sectoral approach need to come in. The Ministry of Health need to engage other players. It is something that can be done, but I can assure you, you need to move together as a people and as a country. On a treaty like this one, for example, from the business point of view, you can't leave them out. They are regulating the business side of it. Tobacco is a huge business. When you're talking about, when we're going to go to quantify the negative effects, even the business positive aspects of tobacco, it has to be a multi-sectoral approach, and a lot of players have to come on board. So the responsibility, Zach, lies in the Ministry of Health, because they are the custodian of the treaty. They are the parent ministry that signed the treaty on behalf of the government and the people of Zambia. So before we even talk about domestication and so forth, there is need to come up with a multi-sectoral engagement and consensus, so that we create a position for Zambia in terms of where we stand and how to move forward.
But now this brings me to this. Then how can we then speak the same voice on the issue of tobacco with FCTC?
I think just to add on to what Chris, before I also tackle that, the other biggest missing link, Zach, is lack of leadership. I call it leadership at government level, because Ministry of Health, for example, and Ministry of Agriculture, when you put them at the same level of conversation, there's no coherence, because these are raising their priorities. But for us, there must be a Zambian agenda. So there must be a whole kind of approach that is collective, isn't it? So that before we even engage other stakeholders, the government should reach a consensus that, yes, the FCTC has managed to address our issues in terms of health, has managed to address the issues of business, has managed to address the issues of agriculture, has managed to address the issues of, foreign earning, has managed to address the issues of tax, isn't it? So for me, that lack of coordinated approach in terms of the implementation of FCTC, it becomes a very big challenge. And that's where, when you talk about, Zuman talked about the issue of public policy, unfortunately demands so that, as much as I see that, as I sit in my house as a father, I'm a Christian, and my children have also chosen other faith, somehow as a house decision, we must somehow sit together, isn't it? Before we engage, there must be an agreement with my wife, before we engage the other stakeholders. So government need to provide leadership. The other key point that he has brought, before we get to why are we not talking together, what are the Ministry of Agriculture has got issues to do with tobacco clearly, and they want to enhance it. Mm-hmm. Ministry of Finance looks on tobacco to get their money. Ministry of Health is raising health issues, very pertinent, very important.
They're worried about the environment and the health of the citizens.
And the health of the citizens, very important. So how can these stakeholders sincerely get to the table? I think the point here is sincerity.
Are we missing the bigger picture, or what is the problem?
Collective responsibility and also coordinated approach. And I think there's lack of sincerity. Let me use that term. Because you need to get to the table and government and say, okay, we're able to agree on these platforms. Then let's engage Zambians. One, you need to create your awareness that's coordinated, that is resolved, that is decided on already, isn't it? So when you are engaging every other party, when you are speaking Zach in Solwezi as an officer under Minister of Health, that's the way Boniface as an officer under Minister of Agriculture will speak, isn't it? On the FCTC, then you have reached a collective. But this, I think, has got a bit of back-to-back push. So Zambia, and when you look at the issues of anything that finds itself in the 7th National Development Plan, becomes a government agenda, you know? It becomes a government agenda, and you'll find that the prospects going forward, tobacco is part of the key sector that government is looking to get their earnings. And when you also look at the issues of health that have been raised by, Minister of, through FCTC and Minister of Health, very pertinent, you know. But we have,
and those are genuine concerns, isn't it?
Totally genuine. But we need to get to the ground and get to the consensus point. One, for me, I think we need collective study that will tell a Zambian story. That's why I said, what's a Zambian story, isn't it? We need a study. When you go,
have we been trying to come up with a policy neglecting the Zambian story completely, or where are we at?
For me, it's not neglecting the Zambian story. It does not tell, or it does not fit, or it does not engage. Because of lack of engagement, it has failed to clearly elaborate, bring out the Zambian story, the key pertinent issues. I think Zuman broke it clearly in terms of the importance of agriculture, the importance of Minister of Labor, the importance of Minister of Health, the importance of Minister of Commerce and Trade, the importance of Minister of National Planning, which is a ministry which was created when government realized that a lot of government protocols or government work is not coordinated. You know, for example, I'll tell you, if you want to open a lodge in a game park, sometimes if you have not appreciated the ecosystem, you may find that from a business point, just open, isn't it? But you find that an environmentalist or national heritage, they'll tell you, no, you're disturbing our ecosystem. It also makes us, it's important. We don't need a lodge there. We need the way the swamps are. We need to leave it in its natural. So that kind, and the government said, no, we need a Ministry of National Planning. That will help. When there are all these things that are coming, we need a central coordinating platform. And I think that's a key role. And I think Minister of National Planning should start positioning itself and getting clear interest in the conversation of FCTC in terms of how are we going on, you know, before we get to the level of domestication. Because in the current state, there's no gap. That's unfortunate part, or rather fortunate, whichever side you are, there's no gap because there's a law already regulating, isn't it? In the absence of that, we would have been in an ICU status. But I think what we need is that level of corrective engagement, and which brings every stakeholder together. And that's why I said there's a lack of leadership, because that leadership has to be provided by the government, you know, and the line ministries, who needs to sit down and they need to say, yes, we are agreeable and we are resolved. This is our position. We have been able to, the position is able to reflect the sentiment of health. The position is able to reflect the sentiment of agriculture, the commerce, the issues of employment.
But is it possible to encompass everyone and everybody brought on board and move forward?
I say it is. And this is why, for me, what is important at this stage is to undertake an impact assessment of the FCTC on the sector in Zambia, and particularly from the business perspective. And I say that because the impact assessment will have everybody on board. It will require that the consultative process includes everyone who is affected by the framework, the businesses, the consumers. Everyone will be brought on board, and that Zambian story which we are talking about will be told when this impact assessment is put in place.
So now, ladies and gentlemen, why is it important for government to have one voice on tobacco and the FCTC?
Can I take that up?
Yeah, the importance of it is that the FCTC is a public policy issue. So Zambia is one sovereign state and just a party to this treaty at international level. So we cannot afford to be divided. we need to speak as the sovereign state, and the sovereign state is one. So the Minister of Health, the Minister of Agriculture, the Minister of Labor, the Minister of Trade and Commerce, the Minister of National Planning, the Minister of name it, they cannot afford to be divided. We need to stand and speak as a country. So, for example, if you ratify, the way the Minister of Health ratified, it's not them that ratified, it's Zambia. At the UN level and the level of the World Health Organization, it doesn't reflect the ministry, it's reflecting the country Zambia. So we need to ensure that what we are appending our signature or even thinking to domesticate has got the blessings of all the stakeholders from within the state and the non-state players. Because as I said, we are just one sovereign state. And we need also to recognize the fact that we're a democracy. So in a democracy, stakeholder engagement and consultation is a precondition to public policy. So we are not in a country like the way, for example, we put, for lack of using a wrong term, North Korea has been, where it's an authoritarian regime, and what the minister or president says, that's binding everyone and nobody can say no. Zambia is a democracy, and being a democracy, it simply means that we cannot afford to talk about any public policy that will affect and bind Zambians without engaging the Zambians and all the stakeholders involved. That's the reason why, for example, Zach, you remember on the issue of the International Criminal Court, the Zambian people were engaged whether Zambia should withdraw or remain in the International Criminal Court to the Rome Statute. And after the Minister of Justice undertook a national consultative engagement, more than 80% of Zambians said, no, we want to remain in the International Criminal Court and want Zambia to continue to be part of the Rome Statute. So the Ministry of Justice and the government collectively had to go to the African Union to say, we cannot withdraw because our people have refused. The instruction had come from the African Union to ask African countries to rethink their position on the International Criminal Court. But the Zambian government, President Lungu, said, take it to the people, take it to the Zambians. I cannot sign or just decide to withdraw the Zambia from the International Criminal Court without the Zambians, because it's about the Zambians. So the FCTC is not different from the International Criminal Court Treaty or the Rome Statute Treaty. It's the same. It needs the Zambian stakeholders, as my colleagues have said, the Zambian voice, the Zambian needs, the Zambian issues. For example, in the FCTC, there are measures, for example, on the reduction of tobacco, supply and production. There are issues to do with the implementing measures to promote alternative cropping or farming. What that implies, if we domesticated the FCT's Act, is that the government should embark on a comprehensive intervention to reach out to the tobacco farmers and begin to teach them to switch from growing tobacco to be growing something else. That's the meaning of that clause in the FCTC. Now the question, Zach, is, are the tobacco farmers in Zambia complaining? Is there a public outcry from the tobacco growers themselves that they want to change from growing tobacco to something else? If the answer is yes, then we should run and go and domesticate this treaty, because there is need, there is a policy issue from the actual beneficiaries on the ground. But if the answer is no, then we should say, hey, hold on. The FCT then doesn't apply to Zambia, because we can't be, for example, promoting alternative farming when the Zambian tobacco growers have said we want to continue growing tobacco. Tobacco for them can be a traditional and a cultural issue. Maybe this is a crop that have been growing from the time they were born. For example, where I come from in Chipata, it's a cultural heritage in terms of agriculture. People are in tobacco not because of money, but because you are born in this. Your father was doing this. Your uncle was doing this. So for you to say, okay, let's switch, want you to be growing cassava like the people in Muchinga or Northern at the commercial level, it would be something that will mean a lot for their cultural heritage in terms of agriculture. So there are a lot of these issues. A public policy must speak to the needs of the people on the ground. If they are complaining, if there's public outcry, then you have got all the justifications to run.
Now, Zumani, is there anything we can learn, say, from other countries like Zimbabwe, Malawi, Tanzania? Is there anything we can learn? How have they handled their issues?
Okay, I'll start and my colleagues will add. The lesson I think we'll pick is from Malawi. Malawi, as I said, The copper for Zambia is the same story for the tobacco for Malawi. More than 60% of their GDP is from tobacco. So for them, the lesson is that Malawi didn't rush to ratify. Up to now, Malawi has not ratified the FCTC. Why? Tobacco has a multi-sectoral bearing for them. So they are still engaging their people and different players on the ground to get the consensus my friends have been discussing here. That story is good lesson for Zambia. We shouldn't even be thinking of domestication. We shouldn't even start the discussion of domestication for the FCTC because we skipped a bigger step, stakeholder engagement and actors consultation. Malawi is still doing that, and their current position is that they will go to the FCTC when they draw a national consensus. But as far as they are concerned, they are more comfortable for now to emphasize on the studies. For example, Sharon has been emphasizing and Boniface. There is need to undertake different studies at national level to appreciate the impacts, the need and the justification for the policy. And that's what Malawi is doing. And I think that Zambia can also pick it up from there. Ratification in itself, though had a unilateral approach, should not be an automatic indication that we need to domesticate. Domestication may have a lot of implications, and that's where we need to delay, postpone, or avoid for now until we exhaust all the comprehensive studies, all the comprehensive multi-sectoral engagement and consultations. When we come up with a national position, as Don Boniface said, where the government ministries and the sectors, tobacco growers, tobacco buyers, TBZ, civil society organizations, and other players that are relevant, then we can begin to talk about what's next, because we would have exhausted all the key stages and the steps necessary for a public policy position. Zach, you need to learn that the FCTC, for example, even if it was pursued through government structures on its own, cannot be domesticated if there's no consensus at cabinet level. Any public policy that can be approved by at cabinet level must draw consensus from all the ministries. Right now, the Ministry of Agriculture, for example, have a different story on the FCTC. The Ministry of Health, they are all the only ones who have taken a unilateral approach because they appended the signature and they are looking at it from a public health issue lens. But I think it's very important to learn from Malawi. Let's try to slow the process of moving the FCTC in Zambia by first exhausting all the studies at domestic level and much more, all the consultations and engagements of all the key players involved from within government and outside government.
Yeah, maybe just to add, Zach, I think I'll give two illustrations for our learning purposes. Our colleague Miambemba and like Zuman and the other guys from the Eastern, there was a time they had done improved pit latrine as a project, and they were done very well for the villagers, isn't it? So when they went after 6 months, it was a project. When they went after 6 months to see how the performance and do an assessment and look at issues of life impact, they found that the pit latrine was clean as they were left before, and they were used as storage for grain, and they were not used at all for what the purpose they were built for. And they were asked why, why? And the study later showed that there was no engagement. You thought the community wanted a toilet, but for the community that wasn't a priority. So it was an important thing they did, isn't it? But the fact that you did not engage the right holder, it becomes a very big challenge. Secondly, I'd like to give another example is, the Zambian constitution before the election 2016, civil society and every governance actor, I think I watched them on TV, they pushed and pushed and pushed that the president signs and the new one comes into law and the applicable constitution. After the president signed, because everything was done under impulsive and reactive, people found that, oh wow, this constitution as well has got lacunas, isn't it? And Zach, as a media practitioner, the conversation is still on today that we need a better constitution. What am I trying to say? Is that the whole government approach is very important. Government need to decide. For me...
So they should not be in a hurry.
Yes. For me, whether we're in a hurry, Zach, or not, but for me, like, if there's consensus, there's consultative process. Every citizen or the larger representative of, sector of society is elaborated, engaged, and there's consensus, and that's why I'm demanding and requesting that can we get that leadership we desire, like Zumana said, isn't it? If there's even every line ministry is not on board on a key issue that they're affected and they're a key player, then there will never be a consensus. I'll give you an example of the Paris Agreement. It became famous, I think famous more because of Trump trying to pull out, isn't it? But in Zambia, most of the stakeholders were even summoned by the Parliamentary Committee on Environment to say, why do you think it's important for Zambia to sign this, isn't it? And I think, His Excellency President Edgar Lungu became the first president to attend the COP Marrakesh in Morocco. 2 years ago. Zambian sitting president to be at the COP and participate in the president. You know that SATA did participate as well. And these are parties, and parties means government. And the secretariat of all these, they're under the UN structure. And government becomes, as we can only talk as actors from a side and as Zambians. But ultimately, when we go there, it's not a health issue anymore. It's a Zambian issue, isn't it? And every Zambian, we should labor that in a way, a Zambian is brought on board. Their feelings, their emotions, and their key issues are tabled. But we also need to look at, is this important or not? I don't think we should just dispel that FCTC is not important or it's wrong. I think we need that level of consensus and genuinity and honest that at that level where government looked at pros and cons. But you also need to pay a particular attention that when you're talking about all this, they have also Zambia's international obligation and also, bilateral implication, So you have the pros, for tobacco and the anti-tobaccos. But as much as we are alive to that fact, how can we labor to say we need to create a collective consensus that will be representative of Zambia? For me, the other thing that Zach, we don't need to treat the FCTC as, sometimes when we're growing up, as you grew up in the ghettos, when you have your cousin who's colored, when he visits, everyone says, hi, it's not like someone's mosquito. But it's just a human being, isn't it? It's just a human being. So I think this treaty should not be treated as unique to other treaties. All other treaties, what they go through before they're domesticated, before Zambia signed too, before Zambia becomes party, can it be subject to that kind of a process? Secondly, can it be an open dialogue? For me, I get worried, Zach, when I come to a seasoned media practitioner like yourself and not elaborately informed about a very important issue. It tells me there's a huge gap because you are my contact of awareness. You are the contact of awareness to the Zambian people. And the only time that you become aware and relevant to the process is when you know, isn't it? So you may not know, and what you know at that time is right. And the fact that we don't need to be blind to the reality that every stakeholder, I think we have to use the word stakeholder several times, has to come on board. We have to be alive that Zambia needs its own studies, conclusive studies. We need a CAP study that will tell us the trends, the behaviors in the sector, so that when we are talking about the tobacco, somehow we can use the global as a reference, but we are now have our own Zambian key issues, isn't it? We need the real statistics so that the decisions are super informed because of the implication that may come later.
Okay, let me invite listeners to call in 0974-870-877 or 0967-877-447. If you've got any questions, please feel free to call us 0974-870-877 or 0967-877-447. This is the Hot Seat right here on Hot, number one for news and entertainment. Thank you for coming through. Hello, good morning.
Good morning, thank you. How are you?
Very fine. Your name, sir?
My name is Daliso, and I'm calling from within Lusaka.
Please go ahead.
Yes, I must say I'm very impressed with the way this issue is being handled, because we're looking at all the areas that will be affected by this decision. Should it be finalized in this direction of Ministry of Health? At the same time, also looking at Ministry of Health playing a very major role in this one, because if I'm not mistaken, I think on this same platform, sorry, not platform, but the radio station, I think I've heard, where the gentleman from UTH and gentleman from Chainama Hospital mentioned to say they are overcrowded by people excessively smoking and getting involved in issues that have to do with psycho matters. And and they are saying actually they are flooded so much that they cannot keep many people there and they have to send other people back home. And I'm looking at the situation where we are going to overlook that aspect, in as much as we may like to look and concentrate only on the economic value of tobacco within the country. But then how much are we able also to consider these people who are being affected in that way as direct affected? And then in addition to that, we're also looking at another aspect where we are seeing passive smokers getting involved. Like in our case, where if you're not a smoker, then that means that someone smoking next to you, then definitely you're going to be affected. And studies have shown that passive smoking is even as dangerous as smoking directly, or even more dangerous than the person who is smoking. So I hope the party is also considering that. And how much I look forward to a situation where we're going to have a debate that is going to be live, so the public can be viewing, maybe live, those who can't afford to get to the place where, to a venue where this discussion will be tabled at a multi-sectoral approach level, where what ministries are involved, especially Ministry of Agriculture, Commerce, as well as Health are involved, as well as the Labor Ministry. So that we are looking at issues of employment at the same time, not overlooking the most important part, which is human health. So this is my approach in terms of looking at this issue. And I just thought maybe I should look at that part and maybe question further the conscience of the panel to say, in as much as we're looking at a bias towards economic value, I'm also looking at the importance of health in this case. Yes, I think that's where my comment ends and question.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen.
Zach, it's a very important question. I think you had asked that question in the middle of our conversation, the issues of health. I think we're very elaborate. I don't know about my colleague. I don't think we need to pursue, we're saying a one-way lane, isn't it? We don't even need to also shift, the paradigm shift to say we are from health and now going the economical route, isn't it? We need, and that's why the consensus, we need to sit down and bring all stakeholders on board. The Minister of Health, who have indicated, the Minister of Agriculture, and the health issues, I think they are super important. And primarily, this is a public health international treaty, the first of its kind on tobacco. And WHO facilitated for it, So it addresses them, isn't it? Very elaborate. But I think my colleagues and the other players, especially from the business or the Minister of Agriculture, Minister of Labor, they look into the issues of implication in terms of labor, issues in terms of business. But I think that's a honest discussion we need, like the callers demanded. Can we bring every stakeholder on the table, isn't it?
Okay, let's try if we can see. Hello, good morning.
Hi. Good morning.
Who's calling?
My name is Mishek. I'm calling you from Kanyama.
Please go ahead, Mishek.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes. I think with me, our country is a Christian nation, and even if that kind of a declaration was not there, tobacco, just when you look at it, it's the producers, they already put a warning that tobacco is harmful. So when we may talk about people being employed, we may talk that it has created jobs, it improves the economy, it is going to develop the country. But me as Mishek, I am against it. I think as a country, there are so many things that we can do. We have other natural resources and we have got other crops. We have got all the land that we can, if it means farming or whatever we may do, that we can trade. There are a lot of things that we can do than tobacco. For me, tobacco, we can even ban it. I don't like it because I see the repercussions that it brings to the people who use it. So whatever sweet talk we can use, we can fine-tune and bring all sorts of language to make sure that tobacco is good. But to me, I don't support it. the best thing that we can do is to ban it and find something else as a country that we can do than consuming and farming and doing and trading something that's going to kill our people. I think that is my take. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Your reaction, gentlemen and lady?
To start with, I think we need to commend the two callers for being very honest. And I think this is the honest debate, and this which needs to be encouraged on an issue like this one. In a democracy, that's necessary. Number two, I think we need also to note that we are in consensus here that we do recognize the harmful effects of tobacco. But we shouldn't present the FCTC as if now Zambia doesn't have laws. So we already have laws in terms of regulation of tobacco production, tobacco promotion, tobacco export, and everything, just like alcohol. So we cannot treat tobacco as a standalone issue. We need to look at other issues that are contributing, for example, to non-communicable diseases. If you look at tobacco as a public health issue, you also recognize that even issues like alcohol itself is a public health concern, just like fast foods. So there is recognition that tobacco, yes, has got a lot of hazards, just like alcohol, just like fast foods, depending on how it is consumed and everything. So there is consensus, and I think none of us is in disagreement with that. The issue of also talking about the FCTC in terms of trying to regulate a good environment that is going to not affect non-smokers like us is welcome and is supported. But the point that, like any other treaty, let's bring this issue to the consensus where all stakeholders affected and involved must have a say. I'll give you an example. Zambia is a Christian nation. I like the brother who called just now. But when we had cholera this year in Lusaka, Zaki, remember that the government, through the Minister of Local Government, Honorable Vincent Mwale, the Minister of Local Government, did pass some form of regulatory framework where they had to ban public gatherings for a specific period until it was lifted. An exemption to that ban. People were not going to churches to pray in a Christian nation because there was cholera, and the government was very clear on that, and other gatherings. But there was an exemption. People are going to bars to drink. The reason is very simple. So let's not use our emotions, either being Christians or either being Muslims or what. A public policy should have got no face of a religion because it is for everyone. It is going to affect a Christian and non-Christian. I, for one, am not a smoker. So I wouldn't want somebody to be smoking in my face because I'm not a smoker. But you see, I can't say I hate tobacco because I'm not a non-smoker and I'm a Christian. I need to look at it from the other lens of other stakeholders like the Minister of Agriculture, the Minister of Labor, the Minister of Commerce and Trade, the Minister of National Planning. Other stakeholders must have a say. So I support and agree with the two callers. We need to broaden the debate. We need to have some public discussions where people must have a say because it matters for them. And let's not get emotional when we disagree. It's very important in a democracy to agree to disagree. But at the end of the day, let's have all the stakeholders involved have a say, and from there we draw a consensus as well as a compromise.
And maybe if I can just add, in terms of looking at tobacco as a business, I think with every business there are responsibilities, and this is where the growers, the producers, the manufacturers will have to also come in and say what is our responsibility to society. And I think government may do its part, and they have done its part in terms of ensuring that society, the public, is protected from the effects of smoking. There are regulations regarding smoking. The manufacturer is obliged to put the disclaimer on the pack. So all those are interventions. But then going further, looking at the discussion that we are having now, this is where, as the consultation progresses, this is where all these aspects now will need to be tabled. What is my obligation to society? What is my obligation to ensure that I mitigate the impact on health of this product? And all these issues can only come up if, as we are saying, all stakeholders are involved. Because then each one of them will look at what is the problem that we have identified, what is the problem that the FTC is trying to address, and how does Zambia respond from the different sectors. What is the response, and how is this response going to be implemented? All these are questions that will need to be answered through this consultative process.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning, thank you. Sorry, it's Daliso again.
Please go ahead, Daliso.
Yes, I think there's a part at the left. Well, I'm looking at, I'm still hinting on the part where we need the public discussion in agreement with the panel there. But in addition to what I had mentioned earlier, I would also need the input or a feedback from the panel just now in terms of Ministry of Health's approach to the FTC that is coming on board. And then they also want to have the legalization of marijuana growing or cultivation within the country for medicinal purposes. I'm looking at a huge contradiction in itself, because the same tobacco growers are now going to shift to the other, which is now going to be more income generating than the other. But then at the same time, not really solving the situation, which is the harm on human health. So I really want the government to speak one language in terms of striking a balance here, because we have tobacco which is less harmful, if I may compare the two, with marijuana. So that's the part I'm looking at. And then I'm also looking at the aspect of Ministry of Agriculture. Should they accept the inclusiveness of their approach in terms of dealing with the farmers out there who have been doing very well in terms of agriculture in this line, to be able to be there, to be able to be supportive in terms of the shift of substitution of tobacco to the other cash crop that will be as equal as tobacco in terms of income generation. So I'm looking at those two aspects. Maybe if I may get comments from the panel over the Ministry of Health stance to legalize marijuana for medicinal purposes when we do not have the legal enforcement to curb the misuse of tobacco, misuse of alcohol. How are we going to manage with marijuana? Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right.
Okay. Daliso, thanks very much for the question. I think, Zach, we also need, just before we take that, so we need to make it clear. Well, I mean, from my end, we're not taking a pro or not, or anti, but we're talking about policy and how a policy or an international treaty should be treated in a country. What are the processes that inform a decision to get to a policy? And I think that's a debate, and that's the issues we're bringing on the table, and some of the lacunas and the gaps that have been linked or related to the FCTC in the current state. We have clearly stated that it's not a whole government collective decision, isn't it? And there's lack of that kind of participation. So coming to Delhi, I think this is one classical example, isn't it? I mean, when Peter Sinkamba came on board and say legalize ganja, and I think he was playing some Uhuru roots that everywhere you go legalize ganja, and people thought he's mad. And that's how the world is coming to look at things in a very critical. And I think we need to subject Zambians to that kind of critical thinking. Is that today what you think, isn't it, may not be relevant to a certain process. Tomorrow it's what you determine your destiny. I think we are 2 3 every time Sikamba comes on board, and people
are laughing at him, isn't it?
Laughing. And today it's a government who sat down and say, hey, I was in Germany, and I saw, and also Sweden, and also, in Stockholm, there's an area, and also Netherlands. Ganja is making them billions of money to address issues of, health issues, to address issues of development, and all the issues of, a country that it needs. But for us, when you come to the FCTC, vis-a-vis the issues of ganja, it's a story that you are saying that, where is government heading? What are some of the collective decisions that government has made that will bring, even when you're talking about marijuana, I think you're talking about tax. You're talking about security, isn't it? For example, from Peter Sinkamba's perspective, we're going to have protected farms.
He thinks we can make billions and billions of kwacha.
So, and Daliso asked a very good question. In this sector, we have also not the issues of lack of coordination and management, issues of alcohol. And Zuman clearly said, I think he said tobacco is one of the most regulated, because there is currently, the law is applicable. It's so, like I said earlier, there's no vacuum in the current space, isn't it? Today, when I think it's one of the crops that when you find it rotten in Jamaica, they'll be able to trace a farmer in Mumba who grew it. You see? So that kind of level of regulation. And FCTC is very clear about that. But I think what we are rebelling here the whole time, Zach, you've been seated here, is to give snapshot and highlights and challenges when it comes to policy implementation and policy decision and the major gaps that there's a lack of
so
stakeholder.
ladies and gentlemen, as we come into the close of the program, I believe there isn't sufficient dialogue among stakeholders on the tobacco and the FCTC, isn't it? And so if there isn't enough or sufficient dialogue, then why are some people advocating for the complete ban of the production and sale of tobacco?
It's an interesting question.
Yeah, I've laughed as well because I would have asked, okay, which people are advocate, but there is a talk, in short, where some people, like the caller said, no, I think we need to ban tobacco. We heard it for ourselves here. You know, it's important, Jack, to note, I think, 3 or 4 things. Number one, if you look at the ratification of the FCTC, it was done in 2008. So that is the year. We need to mark the year.
Yeah.
If you look at the 7th National Development Plan, it is a 2016 policy document for government. So for me, as a policy expert, if I was asked a question by my student, to say what is the government's position on tobacco in Zambia currently, I would refer them to the 7th National Development Plan. That is the more recent government position on this issue of tobacco production. So for me, the government is 100% remaining resolute in terms of tobacco production, promotion of tobacco production, tobacco exportation. So tobacco is intact from a public policy point of view. Using the 7th National Development Plan, going to in terms of referring to the government, the FCTC ratification to me has been overtaken by the 7th National Development Plan. Number 2, there is now this recent position from government to its intention to commercialize and legalize commercial marijuana for medicinal purposes. That in itself, as the caller indicated, is a very important revelation and policy position by government. You cannot separate at some point the growth of tobacco from the growth of marijuana, because the two, from the point of the grower, even those who are in illegal marijuana, for example, because marijuana is illegal currently, they are doing it from a point of commerce and business. There are a lot of people, I've done an article on that, in Chipata and Eastern Province across, that are being arrested every week around marijuana, illegal marijuana. They are appearing before the courts. But that has not stopped them. Because that's where I come from. The why is a big business enough for them. So the announcement that they want to legalize marijuana is good news for my people in Eastern Province. The Ngonis, for example, where I come from, a good number of them. Because for them, it's something that they see as a business and as a cultural issue. So we need to note that now that government is pushing towards that direction, and I think that we should be able to say, then let's hold on the FCTC for now, so that as government we take one position on these issues, a collective position, because there is the business side of this. Just like tobacco has got side effects, we also talked about alcohol. We also talked about marijuana itself. But these are the sectors, for example, alcohol, which government is trying to hold and protect dearly. Marijuana now, as Boniface indicated, the government has developed interest from the point of business and medicine. So we shouldn't rush the FCTC. Nobody is for the FCTC and nobody is against the FCTC, I think, from this panel. The point here is it's a public policy document. So before we talk about ratification and domestication, let's exhaust all the stages and the channels and the consultations that need to be exhausted, because we may find ourselves in a position of the International Criminal Court, where at some point we'll be subjecting the treaty to a national consultation after we've already ratified. And the current constitution, by the way, does not allow that. You can't domesticate an international treaty before stakeholder consultation and engagement. So in as much as the FCT was signed in 2008, now we have got a law, the amended constitution, as we speak, which will not allow this process to go ahead before exhaustive consultation and stakeholder involvement. And that's where we said, let's take it there and to be able to draw a conclusion as a people and as stakeholders as to whether to domesticate it or not. But before we do that, it will be very unilateral and authoritative for any ministry within government to begin talk about domesticating the FCT, because it is going to affect a lot of stakeholders and Zambians, and the Zambian government itself. It will tie us in a contradictory manner at some point.
Okay, let me come to the lady as we come into the close of the program. What are your recommendations going forward?
I think the most important recommendation that I can give here is an impact assessment is required to be done. We have seen so many issues that are coming up in terms of the FCTC and how it will impact on business, how it will impact on health, how it will impact on the environment. And for us to come up with a well-coordinated response and even a policy that will answer and benefit Zambia's needs at the moment, we will need to undertake that impact assessment. And of course, I think the issue of consultation has been emphasized a lot on this forum. That is my recommendation. Zambia needs to do this impact assessment so that all the stakeholders that are concerned with the issues that are in the FCTC will have an input, and ultimately will have a policy that will benefit all sectors.
Thank you. Zumani?
Well, as I indicated, and as we just agree with my colleague, the FCTC is a very important document. In terms of policy and regulatory framework, it is adding value in terms of strengthening the current Tobacco Act, which is our national law. It's a good document at the global governance level, but as a country, I think it's important that we do what I've just said, that there is need to exhaust all the stages of consultations, all the studies, as Sharon has indicated, that need to be undertaken. We need to exhaust them. Let the FCTC speak to the needs of Zambia and Zambians. Currently, if we are going to domesticate it in its current framework, it is very Eurocentric. It is not Afrocentric. That will have a lot of negative effects on us as a country. So I would recommend that it's important to delay or to suspend or to take policy precautions in terms of how we handle the FCTC as a country and as a people, because as we speak today, tobacco has got more benefits for Zambia has got more merits than demerits. If you look at it from a cultural point of view, from a trade point of view, a business point of view, if you look at it from a developmental point of view, all these indicators are speaking to the fact that there are more benefits for tobacco for Zambia than the health challenges. Because, as I said, I'm a researcher and I've done a lot of research on this topic. I've come to learn that Zambians are non-smokers. In terms of ranking, Zambia is a non-smoking country, but it's a tobacco-producing country, meaning we are like Zimbabwe, where we are benefiting more from tobacco financially than the tobacco-smoking countries like those in the Balkans may prioritize the FCTC because it suits them. It suits their health challenges and needs. But for Zambia, I can assure you, even the caller who said there are mental issues at UTH and Chainama, I think it's very important to engage the doctors so that we get the right statistics, because at some point, smoking might not necessarily mean tobacco. There are issues of marijuana which has got more harmful effects on the mental side than tobacco.
Boniface?
So we need to be cautious.
Thanks, Zach. I think for me, I'll echo back, keeping from the policy balance, that I think we need a comprehensive engagement. One, the consultative. Within the government, let them give us proper direction in terms of the ministry as a parent, Ministry of Health as a parent ministry. How are they engaging the multi-sectorial or multi-ministerial working group that can start looking at this discourse, bringing all key stakeholders, the business, commerce, chamber, business community, the line ministries, so that we have this honest conversation. And I think we need to invest a lot in honestness. And I think the other thing, in terms of my conclusion, we need to look at the legal framework. I think it's quite odd, like Sharon had indicated, that we have an opportunity, it's been reworked. then also collective responsibility. Every stakeholder in this process should identify their role. Even I think the industry, isn't it? There must be responsibility. I mean, the government, the private sector, civil society, I mean, the church, and because it's very key. When you're talking tobacco, somehow you're talking issues like extractive industry, isn't it? Issues of mining, because it's $1 billion industry as well. So you realize that you need this kind of collective effort from the host stakeholders, depending on whatever decision that will be made. So for us, I think we pursue an agenda that let us have a collective, whether it's a 100% implementation of its content. If you may realize, Zach, that if you look at, I think it's Article 28 of FCTC, gives room to a party to propose amendments based on the research they have carried back home. You understand? Thirdly, I think there's another article, is Article 21, if I can recall. I'm just picking off my head. Article 21 gives room for a party to rethink and say, we are going to withdraw or we are going to stay. You know, it gives room. But for me, as a country, we can go further into research, create a needs assessment, prioritize a country need and country position and country issues. Then you can mirror it into the FCTC, isn't it? Then even further recommend to the Secretariat, you know, I think that's hosted by WHO, which is the Conference of Party. Further recommend that from an African perspective and a Zambian perspective, as a least developing country, when we mirror the FCTC, these are some of the things we think can be content or part of the articles of the FCTC to aggressively respond to the FCTC, because we have undergone a process where we are informing ourselves, and we have informed ourselves, we have learned, and every stakeholder has been brought on board. And also to clear, because when I get from also the callers kind of the feedback, isn't it? Clear the notion that from our point, this was about policy. How does policy come about, isn't it? What are the gaps? So whether government will agree, to implement FCTC 100% or it will not agree. But how involved is every Zambian? How is the decision collectively made and managed? And further, my further recommendation, Zach, is that let's have Minister of National Planning also and Cabinet play a reading role as well, and just monitor how the process is going. So that, because if it's from Cabinet, every player will play. Minister of National Planning, that's their primary mandate, to ensure that all ministries are coordinated. So this conversation we're having here with colleagues about Minister of Agriculture, Commerce, what their divergent views and what, National Planning would have collectively brought them together and say, this is what we have now led at government. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So there you have it. I'm sure you've learned a thing or two, and we look for a positive outcome when it comes to this. God bless. All the best. Keep it right here.
That was the Hot Seat. Don't forget to join our host, Zakaria Chavula, next week at the same time, exclusive to Hot 87.7.